How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video on the channel. This video is a beginning of a mini series of videos where I'm going to walk you guys through the process of building my all new 3D printing enclosure to help me print all different kinds of parts for my C5 Corvette and to sell on my Etsy store. So for those that haven't seen it before on my channel, this is my current 3D printing enclosure that I built back in 2021 to house my two Creality CR10s. I had two printers at the time, so I built an enclosure to house two 3D printers of this size. And since then, I've acquired two more printers, two Ender 3 V2s, so I'm going to be building an enclosure that will also house those. While this enclosure has been really great overall, there's been a few things I wish that could be better on it. I integrated a lot of cool features that have made this thing really nice to use over the past few years, but there's just a few parts on it that I want to take the opportunity to make better while I have the chance when I'm building this new one. So as you can see, I went for a very clean look, with all the white, and so I really like the aesthetic of it. But one of the big drawbacks I don't like is the main construction of the enclosure itself. The framing for the shelving is not great. As you can see there in the middle, on that middle shelf, I have a bottle jack actually supporting the shelf that the printers are on because the shelf itself sags. The shelf is largely supported just by the strength and rigidity of the MDF shelving board, which isn't that great just from the weight of those two printers. So that's one area that I really haven't been happy with overall with this enclosure. And the second big one is just the fact that this thing isn't portable. The minute that I've got all these things on it, can't roll it around the garage if I need to reposition anything or clean it. That shows you a little bit better view of that bottle jack having to support the middle of the shelf where the printers are on. And then the lower shelves are really just for like consumables, tools. That's where I store my filament in that dry box. But the bottle jack, you can see there, I had to put a plank of wood, and that's what really supports the printers because I was getting a lot of sag, and you can even still kind of see it now. That shelf is bowing down from the weight. But I integrated some really nice under cabinet lighting that I got off Amazon, so it really lights up this enclosure really well. It makes it have a really clean look to it. And so on the top, I just use it for storage of different spare parts and other parts I've printed in the past. And on top of that, I included a small ventilation fan to help vent some of the fumes, because now, especially that I'm printing ASA, you don't want to be breathing those fumes for extended periods of time while you're printing and melting the ASA or ABS-like material. So these are just some features that I'll be bringing over into the new enclosure as well, in addition to that little tool rack I have on the side. I've really liked those. So these are my two new Ender 3 V2s that I got for pretty cheap on Black Friday. So just some basic printers here that I'm going to expand the capacity of my fleet for printing more parts, and also just the one thing I wanted more printers for the reason of not having to switch materials constantly. If I'm printing like TPU and ASA, I can dedicate a few printers to TPU or dedicate a few printers to ASA and not have to switch them back and forth, because that's when you typically have nozzle issues and extrusion issues. So what I'm showing you here is the base for the new construction of the improved 3D printing enclosure, and essentially it is some wireframe shelving that I got off of a restaurant supply store. The reason why I had to get it off a restaurant supply web store is because the additional depth that I needed. Most wireframe shelving like this, it only comes in like 18-inch and 24-inch depth, but because of my CR10s and how large they are, and the fact that the bed it's a bed slinger style printer and it moves back and forth, I needed 30 inches of depth. So that's why I had to order that unique shelving. But that's going to be the baseline for the design. And then there'll be lockable caster wheels on the bottom as well, so this thing can be moved around even after it's all constructed. So what I'm doing now is I'm gathering some height measurements with rough locations of where the spools will be on the printers. The spools will be mounted to the enclosure itself. It won't be mounted to the printer, but that just helped get me a rough ballpark of where I need to position the shelves on the printer, or on the shelving rods. So that's what I'm doing now, is I'm kind of laying out that measurement on the ground there, and then putting those black collars, which help lock in and secure the shelves on the tubing of the frame and shelving. And then now I'm taking a measurement of my current 3D printing enclosure height for my CR10s because I know that this height fits well with the way the spool for the filament is mounted to the top of the enclosure, and I really like that setup, so I'm going to mimic that same design or same height for my new enclosure. So this is the new setup, and I think in the coming clips here I changed this a few times because I had way too much space for the Ender 3 part of it, and I wanted a storage shelf on the bottom if I could afford it, so I ended up changing it. And for those that haven't seen it, this is my Corvette, project car that I've been working on. It looks a lot better than what it does in this clip because I was in the process of wet sanding and buffing and polishing the paint here. So if you haven't seen that, there's a whole playlist on my channel for Corvette videos. But that's a baseline for where I'm going to be printing a lot of parts for to go onto the Corvette and then sell on my Etsy store. So I'm getting all the shelving rods set up based on the measurements I took. And like I said, I definitely changed them a few times based on actually putting the printers on the shelf and seeing how they looked and how much space I still had. If you can, I recommend doing this part of the job with a friend or family members. And this was late at night for me once everyone was asleep, so I was just doing it myself to try and get this done. But it definitely helps have an extra set of hands when you're trying to not thread, but place these shelving tubes through the shelves themselves. It's just an awkward thing to try and do yourself and also do next to your car and not scratch the car at the same time. So now I'm getting the shelving rods all kind of locked in on those black collars to give this thing some rough form and structure, so it makes putting the next shelves on a little bit easier. So yeah, you see I had to kind of like do the splits there and then get this roughly placed and then reach around and try and position the shelving rods because they definitely are kind of moving around because there's only secured at the bottom right now. And it's kind of nice these shelving tubes had little numbers on all the indexing points so that it's easy to line all of those little black collars up in the right spots. So you can see here what I'm showing is that in the current position with just a lower shelf and an upper shelf for the 4 printers, there's a lot of excess room for those Ender 3s on the bottom. And so I'm going to put the next shelf on the top and then realize that I've got a lot of wasted space and I've got a lot of extra shelves that I'm not using. I think they sent 5 shelves in the kit that I bought for this wireframe rack. So I'm bringing over one of my CR10s to kind of test it on the shelf, and there's just a lot of extra room. So the remaining clips here are going to be me kind of trying to position some filament and simulate what it would look like having the filament hang from the top of the shelf and make sure there's enough clearance with the printer there. So now I got those bothly positioned. I kind of cut those clips out, but I adjusted it to where I added a 3rd shelf on the bottom for some storage, so I just have barely enough room to get a storage shelf, the shelf for the Ender 3s, and then a shelf for the CR10s. So now what I've moved on to is printing these little brackets that I have designed and am 3D printing, because I'm trying to use some 3D printing in the actual construction of the enclosure. So what these are going to do are actually going to help me mount some aluminum L channel to the shelving, the vertical shelving tubes. So I'm going to be using aluminum L channel to help mount basically the boards that are going to seal in the enclosure. So I ran into some issues. I have a whole other video on this on my channel of trying to print too many of these things at the same time. The layers weren't perfectly adhering together just because of relayer time and printing at the lower temperature range for ASA. But I eventually kind of just worked through it by only printing 2 of these at a time, which helped to have the layers fuse together much better. So I'm just breaking these off. I needed 24 of these things to build this part of the enclosure. And what I'll be doing is in those little holes there, so this is where they mount on, and then you can imagine there's some L channel that'll mount to those in various spots. So I'm going to be inserting some heat set inserts into those holes, and then that'll give me a threaded insert that I can thread some bolts into to mount that aluminum L channel to the tube of the shelving there. So I ran out of ASA material as I was printing all these, so I'm going to go ahead and replace the spool with a fresh one and keep printing all these pieces. I ended up printing probably about, I want to say like 35, 40 of these as I was working through some of those issues with the layers not perfectly adhering together. It was definitely a multifaceted problem. It was, the quantity of parts I was trying to print at a time, so that affects your time between layers, the temperature I was printing. I had to print at 240 because my CR10 has a stock hot end, so I can't really go much above that. And then there were a few other factors as well, such as maybe the part geometry just allowed for some splitting of the layers right where those insert holes are, where the part kind of gets really thin on wall thickness. So I solved most of the problems by just printing only 2 at a time, so that's definitely what helped me to get through that. And even in this clip, actually, I moved on to printing what are going to be some drill guides to help drill the holes in the correct position for mounting all of those L channel pieces to those black mounting brackets that I've been making. And I'm designing all of this in CAD, which I'll show a clip here in a moment. So designing all this in SolidWorks has been that's all 24 right there that I needed, and all the good ones. All the other ones you see have been the scrap ones that have some kind of cracking around them. So those are the 24 good ones I finally got. So I'll be putting those heat inserts in soon. Got to order those from McMaster-Carr, and then we'll start by cutting up the L channel. But what I was saying before was the premise for this was to design this whole thing in CAD to really help me get an idea of the construction and then how this thing is going to go together. And that's what allowed me to 3D print some of these things to mount things in such a way that I can't find that from off-the-shelf stuff from like Home Depot or other hardware stores. So here's a little spin of my CAD in SolidWorks. This is what the enclosure is going to look like, kind of bare bones. So I've got it's hard to see, but I've got the aluminum L channel, 8 pieces, 2 different lengths for the top and bottom rack. And then that board is just going to be 1/4-inch plywood that I paint white. And then on the front, I've got some special kind of like piano style hinges that are going to mount my enclosure doors. So those are going to have cutouts. The doors themselves are going to be made from plywood again, and then with plexiglass mounted to the plywood. So that's the overall look of this enclosure, just to kind of give you guys an idea of what I'm building to for the coming videos. But that's going to do it for this first video on the 3D printing enclosure build. And I'm going to have more videos coming as I build this thing out and get closer to a functional enclosure for making all kinds of cool 3D printed parts for my Corvette and other projects that I've got going on. So thank you so much for watching. If you guys have any comments or questions about the enclosure build, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Subscribe for more videos to come, and if you haven't already. And other than that, guys, I will see you in the next one.